Now, first we're going to learn about the main parts that we see on all vertebrae. And then after we learn that, we'll see how these parts are different in the different sections of the vertebral column. And that's going to allow us to distinguish vertebrae from one section from another. So the main part of any bone is called the body of the bone. And for the vertebra, it's this big anterior section that can be sort of heart-shaped or oval, depending on where it is in the skeleton. Now, sticking off of this are a number of processes. And first, we have what we call the vertebral arch, which is made of two pedicels, here and here, and a lamina, or a little, arched layer. So if you imagine that we took all of these processes off, and you were left with just this arch here. So that's called the vertebral arch. And inside the vertebral arch is the vertebral foramen. So here's another image of that. So we've got the lamina here, the pedicel here, and the vertebral foramen inside that arch. And of course, this is where your spinal cord is going to pass through. Now, people tend to have problems like where exactly is the pedicel and where does the pedicel end and the lamina begin? And I'm just going to say, honestly, I don't know. What I want you to know is that the arch is made from the lamina and the pedicel, and that's really it. Yeah, that's all. Okay, now let's talk about the processes. You remember that a process is a thing that sticks off from another thing. So in this case, we have little pieces of bone that stick out from the body and the vertebral arch. So the processes, here we go. The one that goes out toward posteriorly is called the spinous process. And this is the narrowest in most of the vertebral column. And then to the side, we have transverse processes off to the left and the right. We also have superior articular processes, okay, and here and here. And as you might imagine, we also have inferior articular processes because, of course, we never use the word superior if we don't also have an inferior. Now, a facet is a smooth surface. Facet means little face. So these smooth surfaces here and here are facets, and these are where flat areas of bone are going to articulate together. These processes here on the transverse processes, these facets, on the transverse processes, these are going to be where ribs articulate. And then the superior and inferior articular processes have facets called the superior articular facet and the inferior articular facet. And those are the bone surfaces that are actually going to articulate together when we put the vertebrae together. So we've got the process, the facet, and then the lamina and the pedicel, and that's all of those things on that. Okay, so when we put two vertebrae together, the superior processes go up, the inferior articular processes go down. Here we have L3, which is the third lumbar vertebrae and the fourth lumbar vertebra. And you can see that here, the superior process of L4 is articulating with the inferior process of L3. And then here, this is the inferior articular process of L4. It would articulate with the superior articular process of L5. And then these here, these are the spinous processes, and these on the side, these are the transverse processes, okay? The lumbar vertebrae, the spinous processes are really tall and fairly short, kind of blunt. Notice also that between the bones, we have these intervertebral discs. These are made of gelatin stuff. That's the word I'm looking for, and fibrocartilage. Okay, so we'll come back to that in a bit. Now, when we look at this from the side, here we have first, second, third lumbar vertebrae. You can see the intervertebral discs. And here, off to the side, we have the intervertebral foramina. And notice that the top of this foramen is made by part of the arch of one vertebra, and then the bottom of the foramen is made by the arch of another foramen. Here's the transverse process, the superior articular process, an inferior articular process. In these lumbar vertebrae, the inferior articular process is actually coming off of the spinous process. And I know these lumbar vertebrae, the spinous process doesn't look very spiny, but that's still what it's called. So that's how they fit together. So the spinal cord is running up through here, through those vertebral foramina, and then the spinal nerves are going to exit through these intervertebral foramina. Now, if these bones aren't sitting evenly, then this disc can get pinched, and that's what this is. So a pinched or herniated disc is where the disc has been smushed, essentially, either into the spinal cord or out to the side, and either way that can cause motor and sensory damage. So remember, this is the anterior side, this is the posterior side. The disc itself has a ring of fibrocartilage called the annulus fibrosus. The inside is the nucleus pulposus, which is a pulpy substance. That's the word I was looking for, substance. And when they're nice and healthy, they provide cushion between the bodies of the vertebrae. If it gets herniated, then it can actually start pressing on the spinal cord and the spinal roots. So these, of course, would be the anterior roots. And you remember, anterior is motor, posterior is sensory, and so this can cause muscle numbness. It's also going to cause pain because of the way it can impinge on the spinal cord, and because the muscles being numb or twitching or something like that will actually cause pain themselves. About a quarter of the height of your vertebral column is your discs, and they do compress all day while you're standing and walking around. And then at night, while you sleep, they actually get relaxed and extend back out. You can also stretch them by stretching your back, doing yoga or Pilates, anything like that that stretches out the spine will actually help to elongate and kind of fluff up, if you want to think of it that way, these vertebral discs. All right, so I'm going to stop there, and in this next section, we will start going through the vertebrae for each section and how they differ and how we distinguish them.